Today, we are analyzing a script that argues for the Jewish origins of Western civilization, defending the Judeo-Christian ethic through the recent commentary of Jordan Peterson, historical analysis, and a look at the ancient roots of the blood libel.
Yeah, and jumping right past any pleasantries here, we have to acknowledge that this author has brought us a remarkably strong, passionate piece of source material.
It really is. Like, the distinct voices of Peterson and Barali are captured so well. So, because of that, we are calibrating this critique for an advanced writer and diving straight into the first high-level piece of feedback.
Let's do it.
So the material makes a strong case for the Jewish foundations of the West by highlighting Jordan Peterson's quotes. But let's look closely at the section discussing the founding fathers in the Torah. Presenting the Torah as the sole source of Western democratic values without acknowledging other historical influences risks making the argument appear historically narrow and vulnerable to easy counterarguments.
Right, because the weakness here is that the script asserts the founding fathers relied, and I think the exact quote is, almost exclusively on the Old Testament.
Yeah, it claims that the separation of power stems purely from ancient Israel, the kings, judges, and priests.
Which ignores the deeply documented Greco-Roman and Enlightenment philosophical contributions to Western democracy.
And that's a problem because it could cause a knowledgeable audience to just dismiss the entire thesis as exaggerated,
Is there a risk that focusing solely on the Torah might overlook the broader tapestry of Western history?
If a listener already knows the founders heavily read Locke and Cicero, do we instantly lose their trust by overclaiming the Torah's influence here, even if the underlying point about morality is valid?
Oh, I think we do. Readers of historical nonfiction, they operate on this very fragile baseline of trust.
Yeah, they start fact-checking you in their head immediately.
Exactly. So the suggestion is to position the Jewish conceptual framework as a vital, foundational moral pillar of Western civilization rather than its exclusive architect, embracing nuance to make the argument intellectually bulletproof.
I love that framing. And for some concrete examples, instead of using absolute phrases like, almost exclusively, the writer should highlight the specific undeniable imagery the founders actually used.
Like Moses depicted above the Supreme Court.
Yes, that is such a powerful image. Or, the proposed use of Hebrew on university emblems. You could explicitly acknowledge that while Athens and Rome provided structural political philosophy, Jerusalem provided the ethical scaffolding.
The ethical scaffolding, right.
Yeah, like subsidiarity, universal literacy, and charity, which makes the claim far more robust. And obviously, we should remind the listener these are just a few ways to solve this.
For sure. You just concede that the Enlightenment gave us the mechanics of democracy, but the Torah gave us the moral prerequisites for those mechanics to function.
Which actually leads us to the script's pacing. As I understand it from the notes, the argument here is that Jewish ethics permeate Western thought, which makes the next section so fascinating. But we need to look at how we get there.
Yeah, because the narrative momentum established by the broad defense of Western civilizational values is severely disrupted by a sudden, highly specific detour into Talmudic apologetics.
Right. The weakness is that after building this grand, sweeping thesis with quotes from Peterson and Dan Burrowie about the interwoven nature of Judaism and Christianity, the script spends substantial time unpacking a controversial Talmudic passage about Jesus burning an excrement.
And defending this specific text using Rabbi Manis Friedman's metaphor just grinds the pacing to an absolute halt.
It really does. It abruptly shifts the tone from an intellectual historical overview to a defensive microanalysis.
Building on that point, what if we looked at it from the perspective of pacing and emotional resonance? Does defending the specific text advance the thesis?
It feels like we are driving on a highway of grand historical ideas, and suddenly we take an off-ramp to litigate a minor traffic dispute before getting back on the highway.
That is the perfect analogy. You lose all that built-up velocity.
Exactly. So the suggestion here is to extract the core emotional truth from this section, which is the historical tragedy of Christian persecution of Jews, and integrate it smoothly into the broader narrative without getting bogged down in litigating a specific inflammatory text.
Right, so for concrete examples, the writer should just cut the literal explanation of the Talmudic passage entirely.
Just lift it right out of the script.
Yeah, Instead, use Friedman's thought experiment purely as a philosophical pivot. Ask the audience to imagine if the founder of a faith built on forgiveness looked down from heaven and saw his followers persecuting his own people for centuries in his name.
Wow, yeah. That maintains the focus on the historical tragedy, the millions killed, without the distracting and pacing-killing textual defense.
It keeps the narrative vehicle moving at highway speeds.
Right, and again, emphasize that these are just options, but getting out of the defensive weeds really helps the overall momentum.
Well, and pacing issues often reveal broader framing problems, leading us to take a look at the opening and closing of the piece.
Yeah, blending a heartfelt commentary on a public figure's health with profound theological analysis and concluding with a commercial documentary advertisement dilutes the emotional impact and intellectual authority of the piece.
The weakness here in the intro is that it spends unnecessary time wishing Jordan Peterson a complete refuah shlema for his chronic health issue.
Which is kind, but it delays the actual thesis.
Right. And worse, the ending abruptly pivots from the heavy, solemn reality of the ancient baby killer blood libel, tracing from Pharaoh to modern genocide accusations, straight into a promotional pitch for a JTV Plus subscription.
Yeah, making the preceding philosophy feel like a lengthy setup for a sales funnel.
That's clearly laid out. I wonder, though, if we've considered how the audience's emotional state at the end of the blood libel discussion clashes with a call to action.
Does a hard promotional pivot at the end of a piece dealing with millennia of persecution inherently cheapen the message we just spent so much time building?
I think it risks doing exactly that. It can feel really manipulative to the reader.
So the suggestion is to tighten the introduction to focus strictly on the intellectual catalyst and reframe the conclusion so the documentary acts as an organic resource for further learning rather than a hard commercial pivot.
Right. So for concrete examples, in the intro, just strip away the health commentary entirely.
Just start right at the cultural shift, like Jordan Peterson recently broke his silence on X to state.
Yes, exactly. Plunge them right into the argument.
And for the conclusion, maintain the somber tone of tracing the genocide accusation back to Egypt and simply state, to explore the disturbing historical continuity of this ancient weapon, our latest documentary uncovers.
Yeah, rather than asking them to click the link below for premium content.
It just honors the emotional journey so much better.
Absolutely. It preserves the intellectual authority of everything that came before it.
Okay, so to briefly recap our three main critiques today. First, tempering absolute historical claims to strengthen the argument's credibility. Second, removing the Talmudic detour to preserve the macro pacing. And third, stripping away the introductory fluff and concluding sales pitch tone to maintain intellectual authority.
Right, so the exact next steps for the listener are to soften absolute language regarding the Founding Fathers, pivot the Rabbi Friedman quote into a broader philosophical point rather than a textual defense, and revise the intro and outro to stay focused on the core.
We really want to thank the listener for submitting this deeply complex and fascinating material. It takes a lot of courage to do this, and we warmly invite you to submit your revised work or future projects back in for another critique.